Back in April 2011, out near the Cascades in Washington, I was 34 and working as a park ranger. I'd been doing the job almost 10 years by then, mostly routine stuff, trail maintenance, campsite checks, helping lost hikers find their way back to the parking lot. It was quiet work, the kind you don't think much about until something goes wrong. That spring, things started going wrong in ways I couldn't explain. Small things at first. Sounds in the woods that didn't fit, tracks that were too big, locals talking more than usual about what they'd seen at night. I kept a video on my phone from that summer, buried in a folder I never open. It's proof, I guess, but I'll never share it. I thought the worst part would be the video. It wasn't. The worst part was lying on the ground with something massive standing over me, pointing at my face, speaking in words I could almost understand. Late April mornings in the Cascades smell like wet pine and cold earth, the kind of cold that seeps through your boots before the sun burns it off. I'd been running the northern trail that morning, same route I'd done 100 times before, checking for fallen trees and illegal campsites. The birds were out, ravens mostly, calling to each other in the canopy. Everything felt normal. I remember stopping at the ridge overlook, looking out over the valley, thinking how lucky I was to work somewhere this quiet. That's when I noticed the silence. Not complete silence, but the kind where the smaller birds stop singing all at once. I stood there for a minute, listening, then shrugged it off. Probably a hawk overhead. I marked my checklist and kept walking. Later, I'd realized that was the first warning. I just didn't know how to read it yet. The forest was trying to tell me something, and I wasn't paying attention. By the time I got back to the ranger station, the sun was up and the parking lot was filling with early tourists. My coworker, Dan, was already there, sorting through permits. He asked if I'd seen anything unusual on the trail, and I told him no. He nodded, but he had this look on his face, like he wanted to say something but didn't. Dan had been working the park longer than I had, almost 15 years, and he knew the woods better than anyone. I asked him what was up, and he just shrugged. Said a couple of campers had reported weird noises the night before, over near the old logging road. Knocking sounds, he said, like someone hitting a tree with a stick. I told him it was probably just kids messing around, and he agreed, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. That was the thing about Dan. He never said much, but when he did, you listened. The first few months I worked at the park, I heard stories. Everyone who works in the woods hears them eventually. Campers would come in talking about strange howls at night, or shadows moving between the trees when there shouldn't be anything out there. The older locals, the ones who'd lived near the park, their whole lives, would mention things in passing. Footprints that didn't match any animal they knew. Livestock going quiet for no reason. Dogs refusing to go past certain trails. I always figured it was just part of living near wild country. People see what they want to see, hear what they expect to hear. But the more I listened, the more consistent the stories became. It wasn't just tourists looking for thrills. It was people who knew the land, who'd hunted and fished and camped their whole lives. They didn't use the word Bigfoot often, and when they did, it was quiet, almost apologetic, like they knew how it sounded. I laughed it off at first. Bears could make weird sounds, and elk could leave big prints. But there was something in the way they talked about it, something in their eyes, that made me wonder. One afternoon in early May, I stopped by the general store in town to pick up some supplies. The owner, an older guy named Carl, was behind the counter like always. We got to talking about the park, and he mentioned his neighbor's cattle had been spooked the week before. Said they'd broken through a fence and scattered into the woods, took half a day to round them up. Carl's neighbors swore he'd found prints near the fence. Big ones. Bigger than anything that should be around here. I asked if he'd taken a picture, and Carl shook his head. Said his neighbor didn't want people thinking he was crazy. I nodded, bought my stuff, and left. On the drive back, I kept thinking about it. Cattle don't spook easy, not like that. And the prints? Why wouldn't you take a picture if you found something strange? Unless you were afraid of what it meant. I told myself it was nothing. Just another story. But it stuck with me. It was the second week of May when I found the footprints. I'd been checking the wildlife cameras we'd set up along the eastern ridge, part of a study tracking elk migration patterns through the park. The cameras were motion activated and we'd placed them near game trails and water sources. When I got to the third camera, the one closest to the old logging road, I noticed the ground around it had been disturbed. At first I thought it was just deer, maybe a bear passing through. Then I saw the print. It was in a patch of soft mud near the trail, clear as day. 16 inches long, maybe more, 5 toes, just like a human foot, but wider, deeper. The stride pattern was wrong too. Whatever made it had been walking upright, and it was heavy. I stood there staring at it for a long time, trying to make sense of it. I'd seen bear prints before, plenty of them, and this wasn't that. I pulled out my phone and took a picture, then measured it with my boot for scale. The camera footage didn't show much, just trees swaying in the wind, a few deer passing through, nothing unusual. But the timestamp showed activity around 2 in the morning, right when the print would have been made. I rewound the footage 3 times, looking for anything I'd missed. But there was nothing. Whatever made that print had either avoided the camera or moved too fast to trigger it. I didn't report it. I'm not sure why. Maybe I didn't want to sound like the people I'd been dismissing for months. Maybe I didn't want to admit what I'd found. I marked the location on my GPS, took a few more pictures, and told myself I'd come back later. That night, lying in bed, I kept thinking about the print, the weight it would take to press that deep into the mud, the size of the foot, the deliberate stride. I didn't sleep well. Over the next 2 weeks, I went back to that spot 4 times. The print was still there, slowly fading as the ground dried out. But I didn't find any others. I started paying more attention to the sounds in the woods, the way the birds moved, the places where the underbrush looked disturbed. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Then, in early June, the knocking started. I was on the southern trail, about 3 miles from the ranger station, when I heard it. 3 sharp knocks, evenly spaced, coming from somewhere in the trees to my left. I stopped walking and listened. The forest had gone quiet again, that same unnatural silence I'd noticed weeks before. Then, after maybe 30 seconds, 3 more knocks, louder this time, closer. I called out, asked if anyone was there, but no one answered. I waited another minute, then kept walking. The knocks followed me for almost half a mile, always 3 at a time, always from the same direction. When I finally reached the trailhead, they stopped. I mentioned it to Dan that afternoon, tried to keep it casual. He asked if I'd seen anyone on the trail, and I said no. He nodded slowly, then told me he'd heard the knocks too years ago when he first started working at the park. Said they came from the ridgeline, usually at dusk or just after dark. He'd never figured out what caused them. Some people thought it was hunters signaling to each other. Others thought it was trees rubbing together in the wind. I asked him what he thought, and he didn't answer right away. He just looked out at the trees, then back at me. Said the woods did a lot of things we couldn't explain, and sometimes it was better not to ask. I wanted to press him, but I could tell he didn't want to talk about it. That night, I did some research online, looking for explanations. That's when I found the forums, the ones where people talked about Bigfoot. They mentioned the knocking, called it wood knocking, said it was a way for the creatures to communicate. I didn't believe it. Not yet. But I couldn't come up with a better explanation. By the end of June, the warnings were getting harder to ignore. The knocking happened almost every time I went into the woods. Always 3 knocks, always from the same general area near the western ridge. I'd started finding other signs too. Branches twisted and broken at. Heights no bear could reach. Piles of stones, stacked in places I'd never seen them before. And once, a deer carcass arranged almost ceremonially at the base of a large cedar. I told myself these were natural occurrences, that I was reading patterns into randomness. But deep down, I knew better. Something was trying to communicate with me, trying to tell me to stay away, and I was ignoring it. One foggy afternoon in late June, I was doing a routine check of the western trail when I heard something new. Not knocking this time, but a low growl, deep and rumbling, like a warning. It came from a thicket about 30 yards ahead. The growl came again, followed by 3 sharp knocks. My heart was pounding, but I forced myself to stay calm. I called out, said I was a ranger, asked if anyone was hurt. No response. Just the growl, low and steady, and then silence. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to turn back, to radio for backup, to do anything except keep walking. But I didn't. Listen, I told myself it was just a bear, maybe protecting cubs or a kill. I clicked the safety off my bear spray and moved forward, slowly, keeping my eyes on the thicket. The fog was thick, rolling in off the ridge, and I could barely see 10 feet ahead. When I reached the edge of the thicket, I stopped. The growl had stopped too. Everything was silent. I waited, listening, my breath coming in short bursts. Then I heard movement. Not running, just shifting weight. Branches snapping under something massive. I took a step back, and that's when I smelled it. A thick, musky odor, like wet dog mixed with something wilder, more primal. It was so strong it made my eyes water. I turned and walked quickly back toward the trail, my hands shaking, trying not to run. Behind me I heard 3 more knocks, louder than before, closer, a final warning I chose to ignore. I didn't go back to that trail for 3 days. I told Dan I was sick, stayed home, tried to convince myself I'd overreacted. But the warnings kept echoing in my mind. The knocks, the growl, that overwhelming smell. On the 4th day, I drove back to the park, but I stuck to the main trails, the ones with heavy foot traffic. I didn't want to be alone in the deep woods, not yet. That evening, I was closing up the ranger station when a call came in from a camper. He said he'd heard something near his campsite, something big moving through the trees. And then the knocking started. 3 knocks, over and over, circling his tent. I asked if he'd seen anything, and he said no, just heard it. His voice was shaking. I told him it was probably a bear, to make noise and it would move on. He thanked me and hung up. I sat there for a long time after that, staring at the phone. I knew it wasn't a bear, and I knew the knocking was escalating. Whatever was out there, it was trying harder to be heard. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about everything I'd experienced, the footprints, the knocking, the smell, the way the forest went silent when it was near. I got up around 2 in the morning and started going through the wildlife camera footage again, months of it, looking for anything I'd missed. Most of it was normal: deer, elk, a few coyotes. Nothing unusual. Then I found something. It was from late March, almost 2 months before I'd found the footprint. The camera had triggered at 3:47 in the morning, and the footage showed movement in the background, just beyond the range of the infrared, something tall, upright, moving between the trees with a gait that was almost human but not quite. It was only on screen for maybe 4 seconds before it disappeared into the darkness. I rewound it, watched it again, zoomed in as much as the resolution would allow. The shape was too big to be a person, too deliberate in its movement to be a bear. I saved the file, labeled it, and sat back in my chair. My hands were trembling. I was looking at Bigfoot. I knew it now, even if I couldn't say it out loud yet. And it had been watching me for months. 2 weeks later, I made the decision that almost cost me everything. I went back to the western ridge, back to the area where I'd heard the growl and smelled that overwhelming musk. I don't know what I was thinking. Maybe I wanted proof, something more concrete than footprints and camera footage. Maybe I wanted to confront whatever was out there, to show it I wasn't afraid. Or maybe deep down, I wanted to see it, to know for certain that Bigfoot was real. I packed extra batteries for my flashlight, made sure my phone was fully charged, clipped my bear spray to my belt. It was early July, a clear morning, the kind of day that makes you forget the woods can be dangerous. I parked at the trailhead and walked in slowly, watching for signs. The forest was quiet. but not the unnatural silence I'd noticed before. Just normal quiet, birds singing in the distance, wind moving through the trees. When I reached the thicket, where I'd heard the growl, I stopped and looked around. The twisted branches were still there, dried out now, but still bent at impossible angles. I stepped past them into a clearing I'd never noticed before, maybe 20 feet across, ringed by tall pines. In the center was a pile of stones, stacked deliberately, like a cairn or a marker. I walked over and crouched down to examine them. They were river stones, smooth and rounded, not the kind you'd find this far from water. Someone, or something, had carried them here, placed them with intention. I pulled out my phone and started taking pictures. That's when I heard the breathing, low, raspy, coming from somewhere behind me. I froze, every muscle in my body locking up. Slowly, I turned my head and looked over my shoulder. And there it was, standing at the edge of the clearing, 7 feet tall, maybe more. Broad shoulders covered in dark brown fur. Its face was shadowed by the trees, but I could see its eyes watching me. Dark, intelligent, focused. This was Bigfoot. Not a story, not a myth. Real, standing 15 feet away from me. And I just walked straight into its territory despite every warning it had given me. For a moment, neither of us moved. We just stared at each other, and I felt everything Dan had tried to tell me crystallize into one clear thought. I'd made a terrible mistake. The creature took a step forward, and I heard the sound its foot made hitting the ground, heavy and deliberate. I took a step back, my hand instinctively reaching for the bear spray. That's when it made a sound, a low vocalization that was almost a word. Not quite human, but close enough that my brain tried to parse it as language. Then it raised one massive arm and pointed directly at me. Not threatening, but unmistakable. A gesture that needed no translation. Leave. I should have listened. Should have backed away slowly, returned to my truck and never come back. But I didn't. I stood there, paralyzed between fear and fascination, and pulled my phone out instead, started recording. The creature's eyes tracked the movement, and I saw something change in its posture. Its shoulders tensed. It made another sound, louder this time, more insistent. I kept the camera pointed at it, and that's when everything went wrong. The creature charged. I don't remember making the decision to run. My body just reacted, pure survival instinct taking over. I turned and bolted toward the tree line, my boots slipping on the loose dirt, my breath coming in gasping bursts. Behind me, I could hear it crashing through the underbrush, impossibly fast for something so large. The sound was terrifying, branches snapping, heavy footfalls pounding the earth, getting closer with every second. I didn't look back. I just ran, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. I made it maybe 30 yards before my foot caught on a root, and I went down hard, hitting the ground face first, the wind knocked out of my lungs. My phone flew from my hand and skidded across the dirt. I tried to get up, tried to crawl forward, but before I could move, it was there, standing over me. I could smell it now, that overwhelming musky odor mixed with the scent of earth and pine. I could hear its breathing, heavy and labored from the chase. And when I finally gathered the courage to look up, I saw it looming above me, massive and undeniable. I was lying on my back now, having rolled over instinctively to face it. My bear spray was still clipped to my belt, but I couldn't make my hand move to grab it. I was frozen, staring up at this creature that shouldn't exist, this thing that every rational part of my brain said was impossible. It stood directly over me, its feet planted on either side of my body, close enough that I could see the individual strands of fur on its legs, the way its massive chest rose and fell with each breath. And then it leaned down, bringing its face closer to mine. I could see its features now. Broad, flat nose, deep-set eyes that held an intelligence I hadn't expected, lips pulled back slightly to reveal large teeth. It was Bigfoot, undeniably, impossibly real, and it was angry. It raised one enormous hand and pointed directly at my face, so close I could feel the displacement of air. Then it spoke, not in grunts or growls, but in words. Broken, guttural, heavily accented, but unmistakably words. You leave. Now. Not come back. The voice was deep, resonant, each syllable pronounced with effort, like someone speaking a language they'd learned by listening, but never practiced. This, my place, my family, you, danger, leave, now. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what I was hearing. Bigfoot was speaking to me in almost human sentences, stringing together words with clear intent and meaning. It jabbed its finger toward my chest, emphasizing each point. You bring others, bring guns, bring death. You leave. You stay away. You tell no one. Its eyes bored into mine, and I could see the desperation there, the plea beneath the threat. It wasn't just warning me away. It was protecting something, someone, a family, it had said. Somewhere in these woods, there were more of them, and I'd been pushing closer and closer to something they needed to keep hidden. I managed to nod, my throat too tight to speak. The creature held my gaze for another long moment, then straightened up to its full height. It took one step back, then another, creating space between us. You leave, it said again, quieter this time. You forget. Then it turned, and in 3 massive strides it disappeared into the forest, moving with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large. The branches barely moved as it passed. Within seconds, it was gone, like it had never been there at all. I lay on the ground, my entire body shaking, staring up at the canopy above me. My phone was somewhere in the dirt nearby, still recording. I'd gotten my proof, and I'd never been more terrified in my life. I don't know how long I stayed on the ground. Maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20. My legs felt like water when I finally tried to stand, and I had to grab a tree trunk to keep from falling again. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick up my phone when I found it half buried in dirt and pine needles. The screen was cracked, but it was still recording. I stopped the video and checked the file. 11 minutes and 43 seconds. I didn't watch it. Couldn't bring myself to. I just put the phone in my pocket and started walking back to the truck, moving slowly at first, then faster as my legs remembered how to work. Every sound in the forest made me flinch. Every shadow looked like it might be watching me. By the time I reached the parking area, I was running again, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I got in the truck, locked the doors, and sat there trembling for another 10 minutes before I could trust myself to drive. On the way back to town, I kept replaying the encounter in my mind. The way it had chased me, the sound of it crashing through the forest, the moment I'd fallen and known I couldn't escape, and then the words. Bigfoot had spoken to me in broken but unmistakable English, had told me to leave, to stay away, to tell no one. It had mentioned family, mentioned guns and death, had made it clear that my presence was a threat to something precious. I thought about the pile of stones, the twisted branches, the knocking. All of it had been warnings, attempts to turn me away before it came to this, and I'd ignored every single one, pushed deeper into territory I had no right to enter, driven by curiosity and stubbornness and the need to prove something to myself. The creature had every right to hurt me. Could have killed me easily when I was on the ground, but it hadn't. It had warned me instead, one last time, in words I couldn't possibly misunderstand. When I got home, I plugged my phone into my computer and transferred the video file. Then I watched it. The footage was shaky, chaotic. You could see the clearing, the pile of stones, and then the creature at the edge of the frame, massive and undeniable. You could hear the sound it made, that almost word that preceded the charge. Then the camera angle goes wild as I ran, everything a blur of trees and sky and ground. The audio captured my panicked breathing, the sound of branches breaking, the heavy footfalls behind me. Then the impact as I fell, the phone tumbling, and finally a stable shot of the forest floor while the audio continued. You could hear everything. The creature's breathing, its footsteps as it approached, and the words, clear as day, barely accented despite the strange resonance of its voice. You leave, now, not come back. This my place, my family, you danger. Leave now. Then more. The warnings about guns and others, the plea to tell no one. It was all there. Undeniable proof that Bigfoot was real, intelligent, capable of speech. And I was the only person who knew. I called in sick the next morning, told Dan I had the flu, needed a few days off. He didn't question it, just told me to rest and get better. I spent those days in my house with the curtains drawn, watching the video over and over, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to share it, to show the world what I'd found. This was the kind of evidence people had been searching for decades to find. Clear footage, clear audio, proof of Bigfoot's existence and intelligence. But every time I thought about posting it online or taking it to a news station, I remembered the creature's words. You bring others, bring guns, bring death. I imagined what would happen if the video went public. Researchers would flood the area. Trophy hunters would come looking for a kill. The military might even get involved. And somewhere in those woods was a family that just wanted to be left alone. On the fourth day, I made my decision. I created a new folder on my computer, encrypted it with a password, and moved the video inside. Then I deleted it from my phone, from the cloud, from every backup I could find. The only copy that existed was on my hard drive, locked away where no one would ever see it. Then I started writing everything down, every detail of the encounter, every word the creature had said, every warning I'd ignored, not to share, but to remember. Because I knew that over time, I'd start to doubt my own memory. I'd wonder if it had really spoken, if the words had been as clear as I remembered. I needed a record for myself, something to anchor the truth when doubt crept in. When I finished writing, I printed it out, put it in an envelope, and locked it in my desk drawer. Then I called Dan and told him I was putting in for a transfer, said I needed a change of scenery, wanted to work closer to family. He sounded disappointed but understanding, asked if there was any particular reason, and I told him no. Just felt like the right time. My last day at the park was in late August. Dan threw me a small going-away lunch at the ranger station, just the two of us and a couple of the seasonal workers. We ate sandwiches and talked about trail maintenance and tourist complaints, normal stuff. But when the others left and it was just me and Dan, he got quiet. He asked me if I'd ever figured out what was making those knocking sounds. I looked at him for a long moment, trying to decide how much to say. Finally, I told him I had some theories, but nothing I could prove. He nodded slowly, then said something I'll never forget. He said sometimes the woods have secrets that are meant to stay secret, and the job of a good ranger is to protect those secrets, just like you'd protect the trees and the water. I asked him if he'd ever seen anything he couldn't explain. He smiled, just a little, and said, "We all see things we can't explain. The question is what we choose to do about it." Then he shook my hand, wished me luck, and told me to stay safe. I think he knew. Maybe not the details, but the shape of it. And I think he approved of my decision to keep quiet. It's been years now since I worked at that park, since I felt the ground shake under those massive footfalls and heard Bigfoot speak to me in broken English. I've moved twice since then, settled farther south, away from the deep woods. I don't work as a ranger anymore. Couldn't do it. Every forest started to feel like it might be hiding something, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was intruding. I took a job with the State Parks Department instead, doing administrative work, reviewing trail permits and budget reports. Boring work, safe work. The kind of work where the biggest danger is a paper cut. People ask me sometimes why I left field work, and I tell them I got tired of the isolation, wanted something more social. It's not entirely a lie. I did get tired of being alone in the woods, just not for the reasons they think. The video is still on my hard drive, still encrypted, still hidden. I've thought about deleting it 1,000 times, but I can't bring myself to do it. It's the only proof I have that what happened was real, that I didn't imagine the whole thing. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I'll unlock the folder and watch it again. The footage never changes, but my reaction to it does. At first, I felt terror every time I saw the creature charge, heard myself fall, listened to those words rumbling through the speakers. Now, I feel something different. Gratitude, maybe, or respect. The creature could have killed me, should have, probably, after all the warnings I'd ignored. But it chose communication instead, chose to reveal itself, to speak, to make me understand in terms I couldn't possibly misinterpret. That took courage and trust. Trust that I'd honor its wishes and keep the secret. I've done my best to keep that trust. The video has never been shared, never been shown to another living soul, and it never will be. I still hear the knocking sometimes. 3 knocks, faint, like they're coming from miles away. I know it's impossible. I live in a subdivision now surrounded by houses and streetlights, nowhere near the kind of wilderness where Bigfoot lives. But I hear it anyway, always at night, always when I'm alone. Maybe it's just my mind playing tricks, or maybe it's something else. A memory, an echo of something that changed me forever. I knock back sometimes, 3 soft taps on the wall beside my bed. And then I wait, listening. There's never a response, but it makes me feel connected, like I'm still part of something bigger, something the rest of the world doesn't understand. I think about the creature sometimes, wonder if it's still out there, still protecting its family, still warning people away from its territory. I hope it is. I hope it found peace, somewhere deep in the forest, far from people like me. And I hope it knows I kept my promise, that I left, that I stayed away, that I told no one who could do it harm.